At 12:25 in the afternoon on April 19, 2019, the intersection near Higashi-Ikebukuro Station in Tokyo was busy with lunchtime pedestrians. The signal was green for walkers. A mother named Mana Matsunaga, 31 years old, was crossing on a bicycle with her 3-year-old daughter Riko seated behind her. They were heading home after a morning out together. What they could not see, and what nobody in that intersection could have anticipated, was a Toyota Prius barreling toward them at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. It did not slow. It did not stop at the red light. When it was over, Mana and Riko were both dead, 10 other people were injured, and the 87-year-old man behind the wheel was not arrested. The morning of April 19, 2019 was ordinary for the Matsunaga family. Mana and Riko had gone out together, as they often did. Riko was a cheerful 3-year-old who loved playing in Ikebukuro Park, a short distance from their home. Her father, Takuya Matsunaga, was at work. At 12:25 p.m., on a main road near Tokyo Metro's Higashi-Ikebukuro Station in the Toshima ward of Tokyo, a silver Toyota Prius driven by Kozo Izuka, then 87 years old, began accelerating far beyond the posted speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour. It ran at least one red traffic light, struck a pedestrian, and continued onward. The car reached an estimated speed of 84 to 96 kilometers per hour. At that speed, Izuka's Prius entered a pedestrian crossing where Mana and Riko were legally on their bicycle. The pedestrian signal was green in their favor. The car struck them both. The force of the impact knocked them from the bicycle. The vehicle then continued for approximately 70 meters before colliding with a municipal garbage truck. A total of 12 people were caught up in the collision. 2 were killed, 10 were injured, including several with serious injuries. Mana Matsunaga, 31 years old, died later that day. Riko Matsunaga, 3 years old, died from her injuries. Kozo Izuka had spent his career at the top of Japan's civil service. He was the retired head of the Agency of Industrial Science and Technology, a body that had operated under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, one of the most powerful agencies in post-war Japan. He was transported to hospital for minor injuries. He was not arrested. Police cited his age and medical condition as reasons for not detaining him at the scene. From the moment he spoke to investigators, Kozo Izuka maintained a consistent story. The car had accelerated by itself. He said he had pressed the brake pedal, but the vehicle had not responded. He insisted throughout that a mechanical failure was responsible for what had happened at that intersection. Toyota engineers examined the drive recorder fitted to Izuka's Prius. This device logs the vehicle's inputs, what the driver pressed, when, and for how long. The data told a different story. According to the recording, the accelerator had been applied firmly and continuously in the moments before the crash. No fault was found in the vehicle's braking system. A Toyota engineer testified to this in court on March 4, 2021. The car had functioned exactly as designed. What it had been asked to do was accelerate. The pattern Izuka followed is well documented in traffic accident research involving elderly drivers. A driver becomes startled or confused, presses what they believe is the brake, feels the car surge forward because they are actually pressing the accelerator, and presses harder in panic. The result is a vehicle at full throttle until it hits something. This particular type of accident had become frequent enough in Japan by 2019 that it had acquired specific internet slang, Prius missile. The phrase combined the model of car most commonly identified in such incidents, the Toyota Prius, disproportionately popular among older Japanese drivers, with the trajectory and impact pattern of the accidents themselves. The Ikebukuro crash was the most deadly and most prominent such case in years, and it forced a national conversation that had been building for some time. The intersection near Higashi-Ikebukuro Station was in a busy shopping district. There was no mechanical or environmental cause. It was broad daylight. The pedestrian signals were functioning. Mana and Riko had done everything right. They were crossing legally at a green signal when Izuka's car came at them. Kozo Izuka was born in 1931. He was 87 years old when he drove to Higashi-Ikebukuro on the afternoon of April 19, 2019. He had a distinguished career in public service. He held a valid driver's license, He drove himself. The question of why elderly drivers continue to drive in Japan and what responsibility the state bears for allowing them to is not easily answered. Japan has one of the oldest populations in the world, and car ownership is deeply connected to personal independence, particularly for older generations. For many elderly people living in suburban and rural areas, where train and bus networks do not provide the coverage they do in central Tokyo, surrendering a license is not an inconvenience. It is, in practical terms, the loss of autonomy. The license represents the ability to buy groceries, to visit a doctor, to see family. Research conducted after the Ikebukuro crash found that mandatory cognitive screening tests introduced in 2009 had measurably reduced accidents among older drivers in prefectures where they were rigorously applied. But the tests were not uniform, and they did not prevent all incidents. For Izuka specifically, the question of why he was still driving is compounded by how the immediate aftermath was handled. His failure to be arrested at the scene provoked immediate and sustained public outrage. The widespread perception, contested by some legal commentators but held strongly by much of the public, was that his status as a decorated former senior bureaucrat had shielded him from consequences that would have fallen immediately on an ordinary person. Japan's Road Traffic Act does not mandate arrest at the scene of a traffic accident, and injured or elderly suspects are frequently not immediately detained. But the optics, at a moment of raw public grief, were impossible to ignore. Izuka had the institutional standing and the apparent impunity of a man who had spent his entire professional life inside the structures that govern Japan. For many people watching the story unfold in the hours and days after the crash, proximity to power looked indistinguishable from protection. Whether that perception accurately described police procedure or whether it reflected something real about the treatment of elites in Japan's legal system is itself a contested question. But in a country where public trust in institutions was already strained, the optics were enough to make the question an urgent one. What follows is not a clinical assessment. It is an interpretive reading of this case, offered as one possible framework for understanding what happened after the crash. The most striking psychological feature of the Izuka A case is the persistence of his denial. From the scene of the accident in April 2019 through 2 years of criminal proceedings until September 2021, Izuka maintained that the car had malfunctioned. The drive recorder contradicted this. Toyota's engineers contradicted this. The court ultimately rejected it entirely. And still he held to it. There is a concept in psychology called defensive attribution, the tendency for people, when confronted with evidence of serious harm they have caused, to locate the cause outside themselves. At 87, Izuka had an identity constructed across decades of distinction: a senior bureaucrat, a high-ranking official, a man of standing. To acknowledge that he had killed a young mother and her 3-year-old daughter because he pressed the wrong pedal, because in a moment of confusion or physical decline his body had betrayed him, would have meant something catastrophic to that self-image. The mind can find ways to avoid that conclusion. Whether Izuka genuinely believed the car had malfunctioned or whether his denial was a conscious legal strategy is something that only he would know. What the record shows is that it did not work. The court was unmoved. The other figure whose psychology is worth reflecting on is Takuya Matsunaga. He was 31 years old. He had lost his wife and daughter in a single afternoon, through no fault of their own, at the hands of a man who then, from Matsunaga's perspective, refused to take responsibility for years. In the weeks after the crash, as the reality of what had happened settled in, Matsunaga could have withdrawn entirely. Instead, he began speaking publicly. He appeared on television, he gave interviews. He listened to other bereaved families who had lost loved ones in traffic accidents and felt that the legal system treated their deaths as unfortunate statistical events rather than serious crimes requiring accountability. On August 3, 2019, Matsunaga launched a signature petition campaign. He chose Minami Ikebukuro Park as the starting point, the park where Riko had played. The symbolism was deliberate. By September 20th, when Matsunaga and 8 other bereaved family members walked into the traffic bureau of the Tokyo District Prosecutor's Office, the petition carried 391,136 signatures. Izuka was subsequently indicted. This kind of advocacy, Grief channeled into sustained, public, structured action carries immense personal cost. In 2022, Tokyo police began investigating a social media harassment campaign that had targeted Matsunaga. After he posted on Twitter, abusive replies appeared, including at least one that accused him of exploiting his wife and daughter's deaths for personal recognition and financial gain. The existence of those attacks and the investigation they prompted says something uncomfortable about how publicly grieving people are received online in Japan, and about the specific pressure placed on those who seek accountability for private tragedy in public forums. Matsunaga kept going anyway. On September 2, 2021, at the Tokyo District Court, Kozo Izuka, 90 years old, heard the verdict. Guilty, sentenced to 5 years in prison. The court found that no mechanical fault had caused the accident, that the defendant had mistakenly applied the accelerator instead of the brake, and that 2 people had died as a direct result. It was the maximum sentence available for gross negligence in the exercise of driving activities resulting in death. Izuka appealed. The conviction was upheld. The civil case followed. In October 2023, the court ordered him to pay damages to the bereaved family. In May 2024, Takuya Matsunaga and several other bereaved family members met Kozo Izuka in person. Matsunaga described the meeting publicly as part of his ongoing process of grappling with what had happened. He did not describe it as closure. Some things have no clean name. In May 2022, the Japanese government amended the Road Traffic Act. Under the new rules, drivers aged 75 and over who had committed traffic violations within the preceding 3 years were required to take a driving aptitude test before their license could be renewed. Failing that test meant losing the right to drive. It was a direct legislative response to the pattern of accidents involving elderly drivers, and to the case that had made that pattern impossible for legislators to continue looking past. The intersection near Higashi-Ikebukuro Station is still there. People cross it every day at lunchtime. Ikebukuro Park is still there too. Riko used to play there. There is no version of this story in which Mana and Riko Matsunaga deserved what happened to them. They were crossing the street. The light was in their favor. That is the entirety of their part in it, which is to say they had none. What persists is the image of Takuya Matsunaga standing at that park, holding a clipboard, asking people to sign their names to a demand that someone be held accountable for killing his daughter. And 391,136 people did. That number belonged to Mana and Riko too. If this story found you, please consider subscribing. These cases deserve to be remembered. See you next time.